He spent one summer sleeping in a Cracker Barrel parking lot, not a shelter or a friend's couch, but a parking lot in his car. His name is Fred. He left that comment in our community, and before this video is over, I'm going to tell you what he's doing now and what he decided to call the book he's writing about all of it. Because this video isn't really about losing everything. Every man in these comments who lost everything will tell you the same thing. That wasn't the story. The story is what came next, and nobody talks about that part. In this video, I'm going to take you through 5 men who hit a wall that most people don't come back from. No safety net, no one riding to the rescue, and where they are right now will change how you think about what's actually possible when a man decides he's done waiting for someone else to show up. There's one story in here that lands differently than all the others. It's not about money, it's not about a bad divorce. It's about a man who lost everything in a single moment. His wife, his children, all of it gone at once. And what he did with the 37 years that came after is the most unexpected thing anyone has ever shared in our comment section. And there are 2 men in this video who were each given $30 a week to live on for decades. What they built on the other side of it is one of the funniest things anyone has ever typed in all caps. Before we get into where these men ended up, we need to spend a minute on where they started, because you can't understand what they built unless you understand what it cost to get there. And I don't mean the divorce. I don't mean the bankruptcy. I mean the slower stuff. The stuff that doesn't have a court date or a filing number. You know what I'm talking about. The version of yourself you quietly put away because it was easier than the friction. The Saturday mornings that used to belong to you. The ones you traded without ever making a formal decision to trade them. The friends who faded not because anything happened, but because maintaining them required energy the relationship had already claimed. The man you were at 35 who looked in the mirror at 55 and didn't quite recognize the person looking back. That's the cost nobody puts in the paperwork. In these comments, the ones who lost houses and retirement accounts and decades of savings, most of them will tell you that wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part was the slow compression, the quiet rearrangement of a man around someone else's comfort until he couldn't remember what his own preferences actually were. That's where these stories start. Not at the divorce, long before it. And the first man I want you to meet hit a bottom that most people never come back from. What he's doing now is the reason this video exists. Fred is 71 years old. He's a veteran. He served this country, came home, built a life the way men of his generation were told to build one. And then at some point, through a combination of loss and circumstance, in a family that was nowhere to be found when he needed them, he ended up without a place to sleep. For 7 years, Fred moved between whatever was available. A VA transitional house for 1 year, extended stays when he could afford them. And one summer, one specific summer that he still remembers, he slept in a Cracker Barrel parking lot. Not a shelter, a parking lot. His car. And if you're picturing that, if you're putting yourself in that front seat in the summer heat, wondering how you got here, I want you to hold that image, because his sister had a big house. She never offered. His family never called to check on him. Not once during those 7 years. Not a single phone call to say, "Hey, where are you? Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Nothing. He was a veteran who'd spent his life showing up for other people. And when he needed someone to show up for him, the line went completely quiet. He eventually got housed through a waiting list for subsidized housing because he's a veteran, because he qualified, because the system he served finally gave him something back when nobody else did. And here's what Fred is doing now. He's writing a book. The title is already locked. I'll tell you what he called it before this video's over. But sit with Fred's story for a second first, because what he chose to do with everything that happened to him is what this whole video's about. Not bitter, that's the thing. He holds a grudge. He said so himself, but he's not broken. A 71-year-old veteran who slept in a parking lot while his sister's guest room sat empty. And he came out the other side writing a book with a smiley face at the end of the comment he left us. That's the man we're talking about today. And the next man, he never slept in a parking lot. His bottom looked completely different. But the thing that was taken from him year after year without anyone making a formal announcement about it, that's the part that's going to hit closest to home for most of you watching this. Tony is 60. He was married for 25 years. And here's the detail that tells you everything about what that marriage actually was. He used to volunteer for overtime at work. Not because he loved the job, not because he needed the money, but because staying late meant delaying the drive home by 2 hours. A man who volunteered for overtime to avoid his own house. She put him through 2 bankruptcies. By the time the great divorce came, and it came the way great divorces always come, suddenly and completely, she took everything. The accounts, the assets, everything they'd spent 25 years building together, gone. Most men in that position spend years climbing out of the hole. Tony did something different. He stopped thinking about the hole entirely and started thinking about what he actually wanted to build. 6 years later, he has more money in his account than the entire 25-year marriage ever produced. Not because he won anything, not because something fell from the sky, because for the first time in a quarter century, every dollar he earned went exactly where he pointed it. No second lifestyle to fund. No social calendar that belonged to someone else. No slow financial bleed that he'd gotten so used to he'd stopped noticing it. He said something in his comment that I want you to sit with. He said he will never get into a relationship again. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just the calm certainty of a man who's done the math twice and gotten the same answer both times. And somewhere in the middle of all that, he said this: I used to volunteer for overtime just to postpone going home. Think about how long a man has to live that way before volunteering for overtime feels like the reasonable solution. Think about what that costs day after day, year after year, and then think about what 6 years of mornings that belong entirely to you does to a man's bank account and his health and his ability to look in the mirror without flinching. Tony didn't lose everything. He lost the thing that was costing him everything. A man in our community, 72 years old, put it this way: my years are now numbered, and whatever remains of them is mine. That's a man who stopped handing his time to people who never earned it. And when you get to that place, when that clarity finally settles, the financial picture changes with it. Real quick, if any of this is hitting close to home, drop your age in the comments. Your story might end up in a future video. This community has already given us some of the best ones we've ever told. Here's the number I mentioned in my last video: $33,000. That's the average difference in annual spending between a single man and a married couple. $33,000 a year that a man keeps when he stops running someone else's life alongside his own. Not because he's cheap, not because he's depriving himself, because the overhead quietly disappears. The events attended out of obligation, the gifts for people he barely knows, the vacations chosen for someone else's preferences, the slow financial drift towards spending that served the relationship instead of serving his actual life. One man in our community, retired, pension, Social Security stacking every month, said something that landed with a lot of people. He said when he had a girlfriend, he couldn't save a dollar. Now he puts $1,000 a month into savings without thinking about it. That's not a budget. That's what happens when you stop being a financial cushion for people who never lost a minute of sleep over your retirement. Another man in our community, 65 years old on Social Security and disability, said something that cuts right to it. He said he was done being a bank, done. On a fixed income, people still trying to pull from him, and he drew the line because the financial drain doesn't stop just because the marriage did. It stops when a man decides it stops. Tony went from 2 bankruptcies to more money than 25 years of marriage produced. He didn't find a better job. He stopped funding a life that was running in one direction. And here's the part nobody ever says out loud. The men who went through the worst of it financially, the ones who lost the house and the retirement account and had to start from scratch in their 50s and 60s, most of them will tell you they built something stronger the second time because they built it alone. Every decision was theirs. Every dollar was accountable to one person. No committee, no negotiation, just a man and a plan, and enough hard-earned clarity to know exactly what he was building and why. And here's where it gets interesting, because the next 2 men in this video never lost a house or filed for bankruptcy. What was taken from them was something smaller, something so specific and so absurd that when you hear it, you're going to laugh before you recognize yourself in it. If you watched our video last week, you might remember Chad. $30 a week personal allowance for 36 years. That was his entire personal spending money for the better part of 4 decades of his adult life. Chad left that comment and a man named Butch replied to him, said, "You're not alone, brother. I had something similar. $30 a week, too. Except for Butch, that was just his gas budget. Let that land for a second. Chad had $30 for everything. Butch had $30 just to get to work and back. Two men who never met recognizing each other's situation through a YouTube comment section. Both of them typing out variations of the same story in all caps because some things are too absurd to write in lowercase. Butch has been divorced for 15 years. He described his life in 3 words: happy as hell, complete freedom. That was his entire comment after 36 years of a $30 gas budget. He didn't need a paragraph. 3 words covered it. And here's the dry humor of it. Butch typed his comment in all caps. The whole thing. Which tells you something. That's not a man who's still angry. That's a man who found the absurdity in it, who got enough distance to look back at $30 a week and laugh instead of simmer. That's the turn. That's the moment the story stops being about what was taken and starts being about what was found. Butch found it, Chad found it, and they found each other in a comment section, which is maybe the most poetic thing that has ever happened. The next story is a different kind of loss entirely. This one isn't about money or freedom or a slow drain. This is about a man who did everything right. Every single thing he was told to do and still got completely buried. And the way he summarized 30 years of it is 2 words I haven't stopped thinking about. This one I want you to hear carefully because it's the one that shows what happens when a man does everything right and still gets buried. Rick doesn't give his age in the comment, but his story spans 3 decades and every year of it shows. Rick's wife died in childbirth. He raised his daughter alone for the first 2 years of her life, and everywhere he turned, family, friends, people who meant well, the message was the same. She needs a mother. Find someone. Don't let her grow up without a mother. So Rick did what a good man does. He listened, found someone, remarried. She divorced him 2 years later. And through the courts, because the courts saw her as the mother regardless of what the biology said, she took his biological daughter, the daughter he'd raised alone from birth. She also received the death benefit from Rick's deceased wife. The woman who replaced her collected the benefit that was meant to honor her. Rick has been paying child support to this day. Both of his children don't speak to him because she poisoned the relationship over years of quiet, patient work. He did everything he was told to do. Every voice around him pointed the same direction. The remarriage was for the right reasons, for his daughter. And the system handed him a verdict that had nothing to do with who was right or who was wrong. He ended his comment with 2 words: buyer beware. Not rage, not a manifesto. 2 words that contain 30 years of hard-won knowledge about what happens when you trust a system that wasn't built to protect you. Buyer beware. That's Rick's entire summary of it. And if you've been in anything close to his situation, if you've watched the courts decide something that felt completely disconnected from the truth, you know exactly what those 2 words cost him to write. What Rick found on the other side of all of it isn't happiness exactly. It's something quieter. The specific kind of stillness that arrives when you stop fighting something that was never going to be fair and start building something that actually belongs to you. This is the one I mentioned in the beginning of the video. This one lands differently than all the others. Dave is a widower. He lost his wife and his children in one brief accident. Not one of them, all of them, in a single moment that changed everything. He went from a husband and a father to a man standing completely alone in the world with no instruction manual for what comes next. For a year, he froze. That's how he described it. He froze. Anyone who's ever had the ground pulled out from under them completely understands that word. Not grief exactly, though it was that too. Just the inability to move forward because the path you thought you were on simply doesn't exist anymore. And you can't yet see what replaced it. And then when it was time, when the year was done, and something in him decided it was time, he moved forward. He became a hospice nurse. Sit with that for a second. A man who couldn't be there when his own family died decided to spend the rest of his working life sitting with strangers in their final moments, holding the hand of people who are leaving, being present at the end for men and women whose families were somewhere else, doing for others the thing he couldn't do for his own people. That's not recovery. That's transformation. That's a man who took the worst possible thing that ever happened to him and turned it into a vocation. into a reason to get up in the morning that was bigger than his own grief. 37 years of peaceful life since that accident. He said so himself, wonderful and peaceful. And at the end of his comment, Dave wrote something that I think is the most honest sentence in this entire series. The delusion of needing to mate for life is a curse we put on ourselves. From a man who lost everything he ever loved, that line doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from 37 years of building something on the other side of the worst thing imaginable and finding it was worth living. Picture this. Early morning, a hospital corridor before the shift starts. Dave pulling on his scrubs, drinking coffee from a paper cup, about to go spend the next 8 hours with people who need someone to be calm and present and unafraid in the hardest moment of their lives. He does this because he knows how to, because loss taught him something about being there that most people never learn. That's not a man who lost everything. That's a man who found his purpose inside it. And 37 years later, he's still at it, still showing up, still there. And here's the part that comes with every one of these stories, the part that shows up right when a man starts to find his footing. And if you've rebuilt anything on your own terms, if you've started to figure out what your version of this actually looks like, you already know what's coming. The thing nobody warns you about before you make the decision to rebuild on your own terms, the opinions. They come from people who watch these men go through the worst of it from a comfortable distance. The family members who didn't offer the guest room, who now have thoughts about how the recovery should look. The friends who disappeared when things got hard and reappeared once things got better, with advice about what a man his age should be doing differently. And they all land the same way, wrapped in concern, delivered like care, feeling exactly like what they are. People who were comfortable when you were predictable, uncomfortable now that you're not. Here's what's actually happening when someone pushes back on a man who rebuilt alone. Your independence is inconvenient to them, not because they want what's worse for you. Most of them genuinely think they're helping. But a man who lost everything and came back stronger without anyone's help raises an uncomfortable question about what all that help was actually worth. Your clarity is a mirror, and some people didn't come prepared to look into it. Don't explain yourself to them. You don't owe the guest room a response. The men in these comments, Fred, Tony, Rick, Dave, and Butch, not one of them rebuilt because someone told them they could. They rebuilt because they ran out of options and discovered that running out of options was the best thing that ever happened to them. The floor became the foundation. One man put it plainly, I've spent the last 8 years building myself back up from the brink of despair. 8 years, he didn't say he was done building. He said he'd been at it for 8 years. That's not a man who gave up. That's a man who started. Now I want to tell you what Fred called his book. Fred, the veteran, the Cracker Barrel parking lot, one summer. Sister with the big house who never called. Fred is writing a book about all of it, about the 7 years, about the family that disappeared, about what it took to get housed and what he found on the other side of the worst stretch of his life. The title he chose, No One's Coming, and he typed that at the end of his comment with a smiley face. Think about that for a second. A 71-year-old veteran who spent a summer in a parking lot while his family did nothing decided to title his memoir after the most important thing he learned, that no one was coming, and he ended it with a smile. Because the title isn't sad to him anymore. It's the truth that set him free. The moment he stopped waiting for rescue and started building something that didn't require anyone else to show up. No one's coming. And once a man really understands that, once he stops performing patience for an arrival that was never scheduled, something shifts that doesn't shift back. To the man watching this who recognizes himself in any of these stories, you don't need to have slept in a parking lot. You don't need a bankruptcy or a courtroom or a decade of loss. Maybe your version is smaller and quieter. Maybe it's the slow accumulation of years of giving that didn't come back. Maybe it's the moment you looked up and realized the people you thought were in your corner were only there when the corner was convenient for them. The scale doesn't matter. The lesson is the same. No one's coming. And that's not a tragedy. That's the starting line. Fred is writing the book. Tony has more money now than 25 years of marriage produced. Butch is living in all caps. Dave has been at it for 37 years and calls it wonderful. Rick knows what he knows, and he said it in 2 words. These men didn't wait. They didn't perform patience. They didn't spend years hoping someone would notice what they'd been through and offer them something they'd earned. They just started. And look at them now. Drop your age in the comments and tell me, what did you build when you finally stopped waiting for someone else to show up? If these stories of resilience and the hard truths of rebuilding alone have changed how you view your own journey, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history and the personal truths that society often tries to bury. Plant the seeds for your own future. The next treasury of wisdom will be open soon. See you in the next one. Take care.